Good. Welcome to Valeocon's Commercial Excellence podcast series, where we talk to biopharma industry experts and thought leaders to explore the challenges they're facing and share lessons learned. My name is Thomas Bertels. I'm a partner with Valeocon's US office based in New Jersey and your host today. Each of our podcasts will focus on a single topic. Today we talk to Chris Bergh, the founder of DataKitchen, about data operations, how to effectively manage data and support analytics. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Thomas.
Would you mind introducing yourself as well as tell us a little bit about what DataKitchen does?
Oh, sure. I'll introduce myself. Well, I guess the best way to talk about it is I'm a big nerd. So I have a background in analytics and in data science. I have degrees from Columbia, worked at MIT and NASA. I wasn't a rocket scientist, but I did work on aviation-related topics. And so I have a bit of gray hair, too. So I've both done technical work and managed teams who have done technical work. And the story I like to tell about why we founded DataKitchen is I worked for about 10 years at a company that did analytics for pharma. And so we focused really on the commercial organization. And I had a tough boss. He was a medical doctor, brilliant guy. And so I was the chief operating officer, and I had to make the trains run on time. And so we get a request from one of our customers to do something with data. And we had lots of smart people. We had consultants, we had data scientists, we had what we call data engineers now, we had software, and I'd get them all in a room and we work really hard. And I'd say, wow, this to get this customer request done, it would take us 2 weeks. And I'd walk into my boss's office and I'd say, wow, it'll take us 2 weeks. And he'd look down his glasses at me and say, I thought that should take 2 hours. And I'd walk out with my tail between my legs and then go into my office. And because we had customers, they'd call up and say, Chris, the data's wrong. You're gonna fire you. And then I'd walk out of my office and my, the bright people that we hired would say, I found some new open source tool. How do I use it? And so I live this life of how do you deliver analytics in the biggest term, data science, models, data, fast. How do you make sure that they don't break? And how do you innovate and try new things? And everyone's right in that equation, right? My boss was right. Why isn't it faster? My customers were right. Why is the data wrong? My employees were right. Why can't I innovate? And so I live that role. And so we started this company to kind of address that problem. And when we looked around on how to address that problem, we realized that we have a sort of an upside down view of the world. We don't really believe that you should replace all the tools that you already have to do the work. And IT's got great tools to do data work, great databases, great visualization tools. There's lots of tools out there. And in fact, the complexity of the tools that people have is part of the problem. And it's more about how you organize the people and their tools together to iteratively deliver value. And for us, it's part of Agile, which is a part of Lean, which is really focused on the cycle time in which you deliver value, how fast you can put new code, new configuration, new models, new visualizations into production, how you can monitor quality once it's in production, and then how you can lower the cost to try something new. And for us, that's really the genesis of the company.
Excellent, very good. So relative to other industries, you work with quite a couple of different verticals there. What are some of the unique challenges that you see with your pharma clients as they struggle with, getting insights out of their analytics efforts?
It's interesting because pharma is both very rich in two ways. One is it's rich in data, right? There's syndicated data, there's subnational data, there's claims data, there's data all over the place, right? That's a challenge. And it's also very rich in terms of money. So there's a lot of people, especially in the commercial side, who are willing to spend money to address their challenges. And that actually creates both a benefit and a challenge for people who do the leadership. Because in some sense, what we've noticed is that the pharma people who are wanting to receive the value of analytics, I'm a chief marketing officer, I'm a sales VP in a commercial organization, they're willing to spend as much money as possible to get their insight, especially during a launch, right? Because really it matters. The curve of growth is huge. And so, but they're dissatisfied both from their internal team's ability to give new insight, new models, new predictions. And they're also dissatisfied because they can outsource it, and there's lots of people who will do it, but it gets really, really expensive. And then, this sort of pay me $50,000 for a PowerPoint gets challenging after a while. So there's lots of data, there's lots of money, but it's still not working right from my perspective on how it works in pharma analytics.
Do you see other industries that sort of have, are beyond that, or sort of at the next stage?
We do, yeah. And so different industries have different places they're on the journey. And so if you look at companies, one of the Netflix or big B2C consumer companies have really taken being a data-driven organization to heart. And for instance, Netflix has got 100 people in their organization just devoted to building internal tools to help their people understand data. And everyone in the organization is trained on it. Airbnb has data science classes that they train everyone on. And so they've really taken, Spotify has got a huge database and a huge data team. And it's because that data and getting value from the data is part of their value proposition to their customer. And so being a data-driven organization, that idea, I think, is where companies want to go. And so, it depends. Some people in insurance are quite advanced, some people aren't. So we're all, this idea of, 10 years ago you couldn't go to an airport and hear anything about analytics. And I had to sort of explain to my friends, what do you do? You do charts and graphs. Okay, that's what you do for a living. Mm-hmm. And now you have Super Bowl ads, right? And people are talking AI all the time. So it's really changed. And so that perception of value of, from wanting to use analytics to do baseball or football has really come around in the world. And I think it's actually a really good thing.
So in the pharma space, right, I mean, it's like if you look at the spectrum of companies, right, so you have on the one side, right, very large, well-established, global, multi-billion-dollar revenue companies, right? So like the J&Js and the Pfizers of the world. And then on the other end of the spectrum, right, you have, maybe, people that have, maybe a product, right, getting close to launch, right, first product. Maybe give us your advice as to if you were not weighed down by all these legacy systems and all the investments of the past, right? If you're like a relatively new company, right? You're coming up for a launch, kind of like what should you be thinking about when it comes to building analytics capabilities?
Well, I think of it, a lot of analytics goes to where the brand is in its life cycle, right? In a launch brand, you're more interested in physician productivity, physician persistence. On a mature brand, you're more interested in sort of profitability and trying to get the payer contracting right. And so where you are in a brand's life cycle really determines kind of the type of analytics that you do. From our perspective, since we think a lot of the value is focused on the operational process that you deliver analytics. We think that companies should focus on how much value you can put in a business person's hand, what piece of data, what visualization, what model that they can look at, and get that in someone's hand to get feedback first, and then iterate and improve upon it. And so instead of having documentation, lots of schemas and architecture, an agile approach, an iterative approach actually delivers more value, we think. And we've seen it from our customers because I guess having some gray hair, I'm tired of writing a 30-page spec and saying, here's what your launch tracker report will look like. And then have someone go, fine, then you do all the work, it's 3 months later, and then they look at it and go, this isn't what I wanted at all. And so it's hard to translate, and no matter what life cycle of your brand, no matter if it's big or small, it's harder to translate the ideas that you're trying to get across and what the data can tell and the business value you're getting across in a abstraction like a requirements document. If you can put something in a person's hand, something that's based on maybe data that's not as good a quality as you want, and iterate and improve, that is a much better way to work than a traditional waterfall way.
So I could imagine that kind of like the way that, especially in like large global companies, right, the fragmentation, right? So the IT people, oftentimes shared services, right, maybe sit offshore, right? You have a commercial operations group that supports, a couple of different franchises, right? All centralized and in some location, right? Then you have the individual brands, and you got the agencies, right? You have a lot of fingers in the, right? In the pie, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, how do you kind of like, bring the concept of like data operations to life if you live in a complex environment?
Yeah, it's hard and it's not hard. So let me say why it's hard. It's hard because in a data world, people tend to have different roles. I'm an architect. I do schemas. I do quality. I do tests. I write some ETL code. And so organizations will have very specific roles in the data value chain. Plus, on top of that, for a long time, people thought data was something that you cost minimize. And so you ship it to India and pay people as little as possible to do your work. I think while those skills in doing data architecture or quality are important, I think the rise of a data engineering role where it is value delivery, where it's more onshore than offshore, where the people actually can do more than just one thin slice of the pie of delivering analytic value, is actually a better way to work. And we see other organizations trying to move from the sort of I'm an ETL engineer in India to I'm a data engineer working with my customer to deliver value, and I'm not just getting data and doing a schema. You're actually part of the iterative process of delivering value. So I think there is a mindset change that goes with data ops, but I also think there's a cultural change, and I actually think it's just a much better way to work. I've found a lot of people, since I'm a nerd and I like my engineers, that it's not fun to actually be in such a narrow place. And maybe it's fun in the sense that you can forget your job when you go home, but it is a much better way to work when you're part of a bigger process.
And so if you kind of look down the road and you say, okay, 10 years from now, right? I mean, obviously, analytics is still in the uptake, right? There's and currently, right, a lot of these commercial operations organizations are way down by legacy, right? Questions such as what's the compensation owed to the sales force, right, or things like that, right? But as more and more data becomes available, as technology gets better, where do you see kind of those? What do you think these commercial operations functions are going to evolve into 5-10 years down the road?
That's a great question. I think there's a couple aspects that I think of it. One is since I'm a technologist, I start with technology. They're going to change to a more cloud-based environment, and the main benefit is that since the data size in pharma isn't all that big, it's tens of terabytes, you can cut and paste and have variations of all the analytics pretty easily. And that the benefit of having the variations of your analytics, 1,000 people are looking at one version, you have 2 people looking at another version to get feedback, is that you can try things much easier. And so I hope that people stop seeing analytics as house construction, right? Where I got to put in the foundation, I've got to put in the scaffolding, I got to build it. And they see it more as a improvisation, where you're trying to deliver value iteratively and you're trying to see what works and see what doesn't. Because I think the amount of business questions, the amount of questions that senior leadership has is unending. I mean, they're always going to ask questions, right? And in an organization, we work a lot with major pharma companies. Good organizations sort of chew through data, deliver analytics on data, deliver integrated data sets, and it just never ends. And so my hope is that in 10 years, people will be in a situation where analytics is seen as just a consulting organization that's really trying to help influence business leaders make these really difficult decisions. Because if you're in charge of a brand, you've got all these questions, all these levers you can push in terms of where I should invest, where I should take back. It is really hard to know. And you've got to fight your intuitions as a brand leader, what my gut says. You got to fight the last sales rep you talk to, fight the last doctor idea. And so the reality is, if you're a senior manager, you want data-informed decisions. And the team that helps you do that, makes data-informed decisions, should see themselves as a consulting organization, should be flexible and understand. It shouldn't say, oh yeah, it's going to take me 6 months to answer your question, because 6 months is too long. It's 6 weeks, 6 days, 6 hours, 6 minutes to answer their question. That sort of time is the time of business that's today. And really in pharma, that's an exact case.
So it's actually interesting, right? I mean, so a lot of what you're talking about is kind of like the speed, right? So get the data, turn it into actionable insights right away. It's the ability to quickly turn around and revise, update, refine this. One other topic we see with clients that be curious about your perspective is just the amount of your organization's capacity that actually goes into doing analytics versus preparing to do analytics. Right, so make sure that the data is there, the data is clean, the data is in a format you can use it. Right, I mean, what do you see out there? Do you see people that's have cracked the code and really shifted the resource towards actually doing the analytical work and generating those insights?
Yeah, and I from our perspective, it's the old rule that any type of analytics, any type of bar chart, has 80% of the work's behind the scenes in data preparation and access and governance and all that. And I think there's a lot of tools out there that can help that. My company can interact with those tools. And so I don't think the challenge is really in helping an individual, from my view of the world. Helping an individual contributor do their job faster isn't the challenge. There's a lot of tools out there that help the individual contributor. The problem is when you've got all those tools and all those people, how do you get them synchronized so that they can live in an environment where either A, they're not heroes, right, where they have the whole system in their head and they're making changes, or they don't, on the other hand, live in fear that if I make a change, I'm going to break something, and so the whole system slows down. So you want that middle ground between I want to be able to try something out. I want a senior leader to see it. I want my sales directors to see it. Even I want the execs to see it. And then I want to be able to sort of push a button and have 1,000 people see it and have it very low cost in production. And that iterative process, I think, is really important.
So building that capability, right? So requires, obviously, you got to have the data, you got to have the infrastructure, you got to have the resources, right? Right, everybody's looking for fishing, right, for data scientists, limited talent pool. Does it even make sense to build that in-house, or are you just better off going to an agency and say, you just do it for me?
That's a good question, and I think a lot of people take that, and there's a lot of big companies out there that'll say, just do it for me, right? And the way and we've talked to a lot of them as potential prospects, and the way that they solve it is they hire young, smart people. And they promise them to be partners, and then they work the hell out of them 68 hours a week, and some drop out, and a few get to be partners, and that's the way consulting world works, right? And so they live on heroism. And so if you have a world where you can outsource heroism and you have a lot of money, maybe that makes sense, right? I think what happens is pharma companies pay for heroism, and then after a while they get stuck, and these very expensive consulting organizations, when they want to ask more questions, the bills go up and up and up. So how do you help? And on the other hand, there's a resentment that happens of the internal IT organizations. They're like, why are they paying all this money? We want to develop these capabilities. And so for us, it's about trying to help, whether it's an internal organization or an internal organization, find that right middle ground. Don't be a hero, but be able to answer the questions at the speed of business, and be able to put new data sets, new schemas, new models into production with high quality. And that comes from this idea of data ops, which we're bringing. We think that's a generalizable idea that's not specific to pharma, it's specific to any analytic organization. And it has its heritage in Agile, which is a software development term. It's certainly, that's really about how you organize your teams and sprints. There's a lot of books on Agile. It has a legacy and a part of software development called DevOps. That's why we took the term data ops. And DevOps means not when you deliver software, being able to have the people who do the development kind of own the operational side. And so what's happened in software development, and I was a software development manager for many years, I used to be able to ship software every 3 months, and I thought I was a cool guy. And in fact, when I worked in this same building in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1998, shipping things every 3 months was really cool. Now, if I said that, I would not be able to get a job, because the frequency of shipping software is 3 minutes or 3 seconds. And most of the major websites you go to are updating beneath all the time. And that velocity of getting new code into a customer's hands is really valuable. And in fact, the roles in a software development organization, the DevOps role, is now the highest paid person in a software team. Whereas when I worked in this building in 1998, the release engineer was the flunky and made the least amount and played the mandolin, and they're good at parties, but they weren't seen as a cool engineer. So I think the same thing's going to happen in analytics. The data ops engineer, the ability to deliver value, and people whose roles were maybe a database engineer, an ETL engineer, will see it as an opportunity to help their organization play a more strategic role. And so that mindset change, it starts from, maybe this is a bit new agey, but it starts from a mindset change. You have to think about, instead of doing your operations, how you deploy things into production, as an example, manually. You want to automate it, script it. Instead of kind of hoping that things are going to work, we're a huge believer in automated testing. In fact, I was talking to a consultant in analytics he does a bunch of industries, and we were talking about the role of automated testing, and he does blueprints for customers. And he actually was saying, oh, you need to do impact analysis, you need to do documentation. And our perspective is just write a whole bunch of good automated tests. And once you have a whole set of regression tests, both on your data or on the things that are acting on your data, you can then make a change and have really, really high confidence that you won't break anything. And so that's really what it's about. It's about saying, I've got this whole bunch of junk I'm doing on top of data. I want to change it, and I want to make sure I don't break it. And the only way to do that is automated testing, automated monitoring. It's thinking about what analytic teams, what they do as code and not as configuration. It's not about trusting your tool, it's about using your tool. And it's about being able to plug in different people with different skills to deliver things. And so a lot of times what happens in organizations is there's like the man or woman genius who's the bottleneck. And that bottleneck is part of the mindset change, getting rid of bottlenecks, getting rid of heroes, trying to stop believe that your tool is going to solve all your problem, but it's a tool chain, and stop trying to get vendor lock-in, and believing all the stuff that your vendors tell you that, oh, if you just get our new data warehouse. Because I actually find it very frustrating that I still find in pharma organizations are paying $1 or $2 million or $3 million a year to implement a big data warehouse. And so they go get a big cloud era database and they think they've solved their data problems. And it really does nothing, right? Because the data's not that big in a lot of cases. And just implementing a database, in fact, does nothing. It just moves, it's just deck chair moving.
Right.
And so you need to, if you're in IT, you need to think about how can I find out what my customer thinks in the shortest possible time? What's the least piece of value I can deliver to them? And then when I get that feedback, how can I take that and change it again and improve? That's what Agile's about.
So it's really the quick feedback cycle. It's the start with small incremental value delivery, automate some of the testing work so that the data maintenance becomes less and less.
Yes.
And that probably also means that people really work much more as really integrated functional teams versus like individual departments that hand over deliverables to each other.
That's right. Yeah, and that's just a better way to work. Mm-hmm. So I think that iterative process is really helps you reduce the amount of work that you don't have to do, because there's lots of data sets in the world, and it's hard to know which one is actually going to influence that senior VP. Which one really matters? Which one's going to push the needle about help them segment the customer? Mm-hmm. It's hard to know that a priori. Right. And so if you can try a little, test a little, do a little, you're going to get much better results.
Excellent. Very good. Well, thank you so much, Chris. So our conversation today was with Chris Bergh from DataKitchen, and we're going to make this available on the various websites. And thank you for tuning into our podcast, and stay tuned for further installations. Thank you, Chris.
All right. Thank you much.